Sam here, and all this week I've heard reports and rumors of LeBron James heading to Houston in the offseason. And I know the trade deadline is February 8th, and lots of deals are going to happen. I know, at least potentially. New Orleans just lost DeMarcus Cousins for the year. Andre Robertson is out for the year in Oklahoma City. So the Thunder and the Pelicans are going to be in the market. I expect them to be in the market, essentially, for another playmaker, another scorer. I know for the Oklahoma City Thunder, they got Melo, Westbrook, and Paul George. They needed a playmaker. I'll get that in a second, but I want to lead off with LeBron. And LeBron James cannot leave Cleveland a second time. It would essentially destroy his legacy. I know a lot of people say, well, it's about winning, and I get that. But he went back to Cleveland to win one for the land, and I'm not gonna lie, the Cleveland Cavaliers, Dan Gilbert has catered to everything for LeBron. He let go of Andrew Wiggins essentially for Kevin Love, and realistically, the Timberwolves are in great shape because of it. They got a future with Wiggins and Towns. The Cavaliers are an absolute mess, and it's because they catered to LeBron. And you look at all the moves. Okay, they traded, starting off with the Wiggins deal. Then they moved, and they signed Tristan Thompson to a max contract because LeBron wanted it to happen. And then obviously LeBron didn't want Kyrie to leave, but I think realistically LeBron is a big reason why I don't think LeBron is the reason that Kyrie Irving left, but Kyrie left because he saw where the Cavaliers were heading. LeBron is probably leaving, and I think, to me, Cleveland has traded for a whole bunch of aging players. Like, they signed Derrick Rose is done, Dwayne Wade's finished. Realistically, his knees are just not what they used to be. He's like a 15-point game scorer. That's not Dwayne Wade. He's not much of a slasher anymore. He's basically a shell of his former self. I mean, he's still healthy. But the Cavaliers, when you look at that roster, they're old, they're slow, they don't have really any offensive explosiveness, and they don't have the roster to compete with Golden State, Houston, San Antonio, the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I'm going to go ahead and throw the Minnesota Timberwolves out there. The West is very strong. There's 6 teams that legitimately are very strong teams, very competitive teams. I think 6 teams in the West are better than Cleveland. And I do think Boston's coming out the East. I think the East is very weak outside of Boston. You can't trust Washington. You can't trust Toronto. That being said, is LeBron to Houston realistic? Yes, because of Chris Paul. Chris Paul still got it. He's still somewhat the prime of his career. He's not like Dwayne Wade, who relies heavily on attack at the rim and slashing. He's a better shooter. He's a leader. He can also space the floor. He plays great defense. But I think much of where LeBron goes depends on if the Rockets are able to resign Chris Paul. You have to remember that Chris Paul is in a contract year. Chris Paul and Carmelo Anthony can both opt out of their deals, and I think they kind of want to team up. They want to put the Banana Boat gang wants to play with each other. I don't think it's going to happen in Cleveland because I don't think Dwayne Wade is. It just doesn't appear to be happy out there at Cleveland, and I just think. And again, like I said, the roster's just outright terrible. And Cleveland owes so much money in the luxury tax. I can't imagine what the cap space looks like. It's probably they've catered to LeBron ever since he came back, and it's killed their future. I'm sorry, I would not have traded Wiggins for Kevin Love. And speaking of Kevin Love, he's not to blame for the Cavaliers' roster issues. And basically, LeBron's turned. I mean, he did this with Chris Bosh in Miami. He turned Chris Bosh from a talented all-star power forward 2010 guy to a oversized Channing Frye. And Kevin Love is basically an oversized Kyle Korver. He's basically relegated to nothing but a 3-point shooter. He's not a 20-10 double-double machine that he was in Minnesota. Granted, he and Chris Bosh were not leaders for Minnesota and Toronto when they were there, but they were 20-10 all-star players. Like, they were good players, and they've been relegated to, like, essentially one-dimensional players. Like, they essentially became stretch fours, and that's really not who they are. So LeBron is kind of to blame, and he should get much of the blame because, like I said, they catered to everything he's wanted. He's basically the GM, the owner, and the coach. And speaking of the coach, Tyronn Lue is not the guy. Their defensive problems still are an issue, and we're in January. We're almost at the time of the year where, you get to the All-Star break and you got to start fixing your issues, and you got to start making that push towards playoffs. I know the Cleveland Cavaliers believe, Cleveland, we got LeBron, we're going to win the East. Boston's outright the best defensive team in the league, and they've got Kyrie Irving, and they might be getting Gordon Hayward back. So they better make some moves at the deadline. But the problem is the only tradable piece they sent the only tradable piece they have outside of Kevin Love and LeBron to Boston. I'm sorry, but and Kevin Love is not really worth much now. Like, you're banking on basically every trade that I hear as far as rumors are concerned, it's Kevin Love and draft picks. Kevin Love and draft picks. Why? Because the roster is terrible. Isaiah Thomas is horribly overrated. He's just nothing more than a smaller James Harden. And James Harden's improved defensively. Isaiah Thomas is he's a ball dominant player. He's consistently ripped into the Cavaliers' locker room issues. Talking about their defense, they were a better defensive team in Boston than they are in Cleveland. Well, excuse me, Isaiah. Boston got crushed in the Eastern Conference Finals. I think Kyrie Irving is a legit. I think Kyrie Irving now is a legit leader, and I think that's the one positive you could take with LeBron that he's had on Kyrie. Kyrie was essentially just a scorer, like what Isaiah Thomas is. He was a solid defensive player, but he could stay healthy. He's got great handles, but he's really improved his leadership ability. And then look at Boston. They're the number one seed in the East. They don't have any locker room issues. You don't have any of this jargon going on. And they have a good coach. They have a smart coach. And in the playoffs, we're not in March and April. We're certainly not May and June. But there's no guarantee that Cleveland's going to be meeting up with the Golden State Warriors. And actually, I'm going to go and say, I don't think there's guarantee that the Golden State Warriors are going to make it either. Houston's in the market for another big. Possibly for another playmaker. The Houston Rockets are going to have to pay, obviously, Harden and Chris Paul, which is going to throw the wrench in the whole LeBron situation. So, realistically, it's realistic that LeBron could go to Houston. The Lakers aren't much of an improvement from last season, and they do have young talent. They do have cap space, and they're not paying much in the luxury tax, like Cleveland does. But the problem with the Lakers is they don't have a roster ready to win now. Houston does. To me, the only way it's going to work in Houston is if LeBron accepts the fact that he's not the GM, and he's not the owner, and he just comes in and plays. And because, quite frankly, like I said, I think if they hadn't traded Wiggins, they would have kept Kyrie. I think Kyrie would have been happier knowing, I got Wiggins. At least I got somebody to grow with, and kind of continue our legacy in Cleveland. That's the problem. When LeBron leaves Cleveland, there's nobody that'll pick up the pieces, and the Brooklyn Nets are not that terrible this year. Their pick is looking like it won't. Obviously, the draft lottery system, you never know what's going to happen. But as far as I'm concerned, that pick is not going to be a top 5 pick. And there's not really. They could get Trae Young, but again, it's just that's really the only hope is that draft pick. Cleveland has just too many roster holes. They really do, and they're too slow. They don't score enough points, and they're not a great defensive team. And you saw it in the finals. They got away with it last year in the Eastern Conference playoffs, but in the finals, these Western Conference teams can score. They could score at will. Like, Houston can drop 160.5. It's goals they can drop the same, and maybe even more because they've got Kevin Durant. Durant's really the biggest X factor for the Warriors. February 8th is the trade deadline. It's before the All-Star game, and that's really chaotic. Not that I expect any All-Stars to get traded, but really, you got these All-Star teams all named out. You got the trade deadline before the All-Star break. That's going to throw a huge wrench in everything. But I guess we'll see what happens. I don't know what the rules are as far as, can a player still play in the All-Star game even though he plays for a different team? Like I said, I don't expect any All-Stars to be traded. And Anthony Davis is not tradable. Why? Because he just signed a monster contract. and it's gonna take the Kings ransom to get him out of New Orleans. So, but the reality is for LeBron to Houston, the only way it's gonna happen is if Chris Paul resigns and the Rockets get Carmelo Anthony and get LeBron to take a pay cut. I just don't know what LeBron's thinking is. Like, is he thinking of winning, or is he just trying to play until he's? Is he just playing until he can't play anymore? I mean, really, what's his motivation? So I think, and I felt like before the season the Rockets were going to get Carmelo Anthony, and I was so certain about it, and it didn't happen. And I think this could be another Melo. I think somebody could just swoop in and get LeBron at the last second in free agency, but I mean, LeBron might try and get one more max deal, and it just won't work with Houston because Houston's, like I said, Harden's got a pretty big contract, and they got to pay Chris Paul, and then they got to pay Clint Capella. But the problem with Clint Capella's contract is he's a restricted free agent, which means somebody's going to pay a motherload of money for a guy that's consistently improving, and the Rockets are probably looking like another Chandler Parsons situation. The only difference is I think Capella has sky-high potential, but I think Capella would be smart to try and stay in Houston if he can. If I was at him, I would certainly would be working with Hakeem. You're consistent. I mean, like I said, you got Hakeem almost on a daily basis here in Houston. Whereas if he goes somewhere else, he's not going to get that same treatment. But I guess, the hard part is with the trade deadline before the All-Star break, it's going to be hard to move players, especially if they're in the All-Star game, because, baseball, if you trade a guy that's in the All-Star game, he can't participate because, he was voted as a member of that team. Like, it's the Carlos Beltran situation way back in 2004, when he was moved from the Kansas City Royals to the Houston Astros, and there's a chance that he wasn't going to get into the All-Star game that year, but the Astros petitioned to get him in because he was voted in as an American League All-Star, and it was just a mess. So I don't know what the rules are regarding that, but it's going to be hard to move players before knowing that the All-Star break is essentially after the trade deadline. But LeBron to Houston is a real possibility. It's a very realistic thing to think about. It's either Houston or he stays in Cleveland. But I will say this, Cleveland really catered to him, and it's really cost them much of their future. They could have had Kyrie and Wiggins after post LeBron, and they'd still been fine. They'd still been probably a top 5 team in the East. But now, they're in deep water. They're in deep trouble. They have too many untradeable players, and they're just too old. They have too many players that nobody wants. Isaiah Thomas has very fastly become a guy that nobody wants in their locker room. At least that's my opinion. But we'll see what happens. The NBA season is full swing. We're in January. We're almost in February. It means the playoffs are around the corner. Speaking of playoffs, Super Bowl 52 is next Sunday. The Pro Bowl's today. Not interested. And so this has been Sam Darley. Thank you for watching.